President Russ, fellow Lions and guests, we have the pleasure today of hearing from the Longview Housing Authority. We have Chris Pegg, the Executive Director, and Wayne Ostermiller, member of the Board of Directors. Wayne has been the longest-serving member of the board since the early 80s, appointed by somebody by the name of George Rader, who at the time had reached his highest office of mayor of Longview. I did find out something interesting about Wayne. He does make it possible for Kyle James to remain retired, and so Kyle wants to thank him for that.
And it's true.
Something about poker games. Anyway, before his retirement, Wayne was the plant manager at Kalama Chemical. So Wayne will introduce Chris, so please give a warm Lions welcome to Wayne Ostermiller.
Thank you, Phil. A couple of years ago, I was attending a forum at LCC having to do with housing needs in communities with increasing elderly populations. The first speaker stood up and said, the organization that is doing the most in this community for senior citizens needing housing is the Longview Housing Authority. And he went on to say, and nobody knows anything about them. So today we're going to try to address that lack of knowledge about the Housing Authority. And I will be deferring in a few minutes to the main speaker, Chris Pegg. So let me introduce her to you. Chris was born in Montana on a cattle ranch near Helena. In the mid-'70s, her family moved to Central Oregon, and Chris graduated from high school from Primeville High School. She started her college career in Central Oregon, and then moved to Longview. After moving to Longview, Chris found herself with 2 daughters, no husband, and she was living on welfare. However, she continued her college education at LCC and subsequently got her BS degree from Linfield College. She went to work for the Kelso Housing Authority in 1986. In 1990, she moved over to the Longview Housing Authority, and at that time she was the 4th employee at the Longview Housing Authority. She became the executive director of Longview Housing Authority in 1998. She is a member of several state and national organizations having to do with housing, and she is recognized as an authority in her field. The Housing Authority actually got started in the mid-'70s, and it was chartered by the Longview City Council. I want to let you know that we are not associated with CAP. We're not associated with the Emergency Support Shelter or Love Overwhelming or the Community House. However, we have worked on certain programs with those organizations. We provide housing assistance to low-income seniors, low-income handicapped, low-income and homeless families. Currently, we have about 1,000 children in our various programs. We also provide assistance to homeless veterans and from families who are exiting drug treatment programs. We currently own or manage housing units in Woodland, Kelso, Longview, Castle Rock, Cathlamet, Raymond, and South Bend. In addition, we provide housing assistance payments to private landlords in the 4 counties that we serve, and currently those payments come to about $800,000 per month. Our biggest program is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, previously known as a Section 8 program. A person applying in our communities for housing assistance will wait approximately 2 years to receive an interview as to whether they are eligible for assistance. Currently, we are not taking applications for membership in our programs just because of the large backlog that we currently have. The Housing Authority is directed by a 6-person board. Chris, as I said, is our executive director. We have approximately 50 employees, some of whom are working part-time as a result of the national sequestration effort in Washington, D.C. So with that overview, I'm going to turn the speaker's mic over to Chris, and she will give you some more information about what we do and how we do it.
Thank you, Wayne. So needless to say, it's great to have somebody on the board that has such a tremendous history, not only of the organization, but of the community that we live in. It's tremendously helpful. And Wayne has always been a big champion. So thank you very much, Wayne. So he touched briefly on who we serve in this community. I thought I would transition over and talk a little bit about the communities we serve. As Wayne mentioned, we were created by the city of Longview back in 1975. But since that time, we have entered into agreements with not only the balance of Cowlitz County, except for Kelso and Kalama, which have their own housing authorities, but also Wahkiakum County, Pacific County, and Lewis County. And mainly that's because they have approached us because they don't have a large enough population really to justify creating their own housing authority. It's expensive, as you guys all know. It's expensive to pay for that administrative staffing in order to run that. So it's worked out very well for us. But what we found, and I'm going to transition into talking a little bit about, as Wayne did, about who we serve to what the needs are right now. We're currently involved in a strategic planning process. We're about 3/4 of the way through the process. So one of the things that we have done as we entered into that process was do a lot of research about what the needs were in the communities that we serve. And we have combed through tons of research and documents. And what we found is really that the 4 counties that we serve have consistently struggled compared to the rest of the state. They're economically, and I'm going to say this is depressing, but I'll end up on a good note, so don't worry. They're economically depressed. They're struggling to create enough family wage jobs for the populations that live there. There's been little economic growth. They're facing infrastructure challenges, and they've all had a historic reliance on extraction industries like logging, primarily fishing. Although there are glimmers of hope in those communities, they all suffer the byproducts of this poor economy and the associated poverty. They have high rates of drug abuse and alcoholism, high rates of homelessness, an aging housing stock, generational poverty, high rates of mental illness, an aging population, and lack of adequate services to support the families and the needs that are in those communities. So one of the studies we looked at was the 2015 county health rankings. And those counties, it kind of tells where we rank in those 4 counties. Cowlitz County, out of the 39 counties, ranked 32nd. Lewis County was 26, Pacific County was 38, and Wahkiakum County was at the very bottom at 39. So there's big challenges in the communities that we serve. And as I say this, I say that to say that I really believe that we can't go out and create a good strategic plan, and we as a community can't figure out how to address what the needs are if we don't know what those needs are. So it's better to know the devil that's there so that you know how to develop the strategies that we need to develop in order to take care of that. So I look at it more as a challenge than I do I try not to get depressed about what it says. It just tells us what we need to do something about it. So some of the other challenges that we're facing are, as Wayne touched on, the sequestration and the budget caps had a big impact, not only on government agencies, but the other nonprofit agencies in the communities that we serve. The funding at all of our levels, the local funding, which has really been impacted, and I can see Ken Botero back there, has really been impacted by the reduction in the federal funding. We've seen our home dollars go down, our CDBG dollars go down. At the state level, the Housing Trust Fund, which is one of our main sources of funding for developing new housing, has been dramatically slashed from $200 million to about $75 million now, and there was none last year. At the federal level, it's been the same way. All the funds have been dramatically cut. And our voucher program, which Wayne touched on, is our largest program. That program has just bounced all over the map, which makes it really difficult to manage and to run like a business. Our fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. We typically don't know what our funding is going to be until April of May, which is 6 months into the year. So we enter into our budget cycles with a best guess of how much money we're going to get. And I've been doing it so long, we generally get fairly close, but it's always really a challenge. And then it bounces around all over. So I say that only to say that it makes it really difficult to create programs and have confidence that the money's going to be there that we need when we do that. Also, as Wayne mentioned when he talked about the waiting list, the needs are far greater than we have the resources to address, not just because of money, but because of staffing. Also, in all the counties, we've seen decreasing incomes, especially over the last recession, and rents have been increasing in every county that we serve, which means things are going in the wrong direction. And we also operate in a really heavily regulated industry, which makes things much more expensive to run. So there's a share of challenges out there, and then I think one of the greatest when we're talking about developing new resources is the whole not in my backyard issue. If we are trying to address housing, develop housing for people coming out of drug treatment programs, it's very challenging to find a neighborhood that is willing to have that project sited in their neighborhood. So it makes it just that much more difficult. So one of the handouts that came out, and I apologize for the number of handouts, but I thought it was good information. Two of the handouts that I'm passing out, that Bill passed out for me, are these two. It says the Longview area in Cowlitz County. I also serve on the Governor's Affordable Housing Board, and last year we completed a statewide housing needs survey. Again, just to figure out what the needs are so that we can figure out how to start addressing them. The two handouts that I gave you are two pieces of that document. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, but there's a few important things I wanted to point out. If you look up in the upper right-hand corner on either document, they're going to be the same because Longview is the biggest city in our county, so it makes sense. But if you look at the median family income, the low-income renter households, and the subsidized housing units, it kind of gives you an indication of what some of the needs are in our area. The low-income renter households are about 30% of the people in our community are receiving state subsidies of some kind, whether that's TANF, whether it's food stamps, but some type of state subsidy. So it kind of gives you an indication of the level of poverty. If you look down to the first chart below that where it says affordable housing gap, what this says is for every 100 households that are either 0 to 30% of area median income. So if the median family income is $59,000, you figure out what 39% of that, and it's not very much for a family to live in, and that's for a family of 4. So if you look at people that are earning 0 to 30% of that amount of money, out of 100 families that need the housing, there's only 19 units available. If you go up to 50% of that, there's only 47 units available. And the next chart over forecasts out to 2019 and what the need is going to look like at that time. And then if you turn around to the other side and you look at the cost burden, the part that speaks the loudest to me, if you look at the darkest blue on all of those columns, those are the families that are severely cost burdened. That means that they're paying over 50% of their income for rent and utilities. If you're paying over 50% and you're not getting very much money anyway, that means there's very little money left for food, for prescriptions, for school supplies for your kids. So it's a big, big problem. So I won't go into the rest of it, but if any of you have questions afterwards or want to give me a call, I'd be happy to talk about it. So as I mentioned, we're currently in the process of working out, developing a strategic plan. And the purpose of that is really to make sure that because the need is so great, that we're most effectively targeting our resources, that we're picking out the populations with the greatest need to try to target our resources, our people, our money, our leadership, to try to make a dent in that great need. We're also looking at ways, one thing that came up really loudly in our planning process this year is the board is really interested in figuring out a way, because of the about 1,500 people we assist on the voucher program, about 75% of those are either elderly or disabled, which means that most of those families are not going to be letting go of their voucher until they probably pass away, frankly. So what we've looked at is for the other 25% of the families that are work able and just not working for whatever reason, that we try to figure out a way to help them move up and off of the voucher program as quickly as possible so that we can turn those vouchers over to another family. So what we found is that it doesn't just mean that they need housing. Generally they need some type of counseling, some type of budgeting assistance, learning how to be good renters. There's a whole variety of needs. So figuring out as an agency about how we can best provide those services to those families too, whether it be in partnership with other organizations, which we work with many of them already, or whether it's bringing in the services in-house and doing it ourselves, which is what we've done with our veterans program. So we're also looking at ways that we can collaborate more effectively with our partners, and then focus our development efforts, whether it's programs or developing new housing units, on the populations that need it the most. So I'm excited about what that outcome is going to be, and looking forward to finishing that process as well. It's been very time consuming. So the last thing I handed out to you, there were two things. The really colorful chart is just an overview of the programs that we currently run. And then I also passed out 4 success stories, because I wanted to finish up today, because a lot of what I've told you is frankly depressing. But I wanted to finish up today by saying the programs that we run really do make a difference in people's lives. And I handed out 4 success stories, and those are just 4 of many. We see this happen every single month, whether it's a homeless veteran who's been living on the streets for 20 years and now he has a home to live in and he's accessed his benefits, or whether it's a family that has now moved into their own home and they've built their own house using self-help housing and their kids are doing well in school. There's a whole variety of success stories that we see every single month. So I just want to thank you for inviting us to come and speak today, and if you have any questions, Wayne or I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Yes.
Sure. How many families are you working with at any given time?
Usually about 1,500.
Let me give each one of you a mug. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much, Russ.
You can put your favorite beverage or least favorite beverage, depending on what you're up to.
We had another question back
I know
here.
what Wayne's beverage is.
Go ahead.
When some of the programs are income-based, how do you get a family off of, what is the incentive? How do you get them off of that cycle where they can increase their income so then they no longer are in need of that type of housing? When a lot of people look at it, well, there's more incentive to stay, to not increase. How do you deal with that? What would you say to that question? Because I know I've been asked that myself.
Yes, thank you, Patty. Patty used to work for us too, if you didn't know that. But she wasn't a plant. It was an honest question. So
We know.
So there's a couple different sides to that. Frankly, in all the years I've been working in this business, and I have worked a lot of years at the national level too, the programs were designed so that they really don't encourage people to be honest. Because the more they're honest and they report their income, every time they have an increase in income, we raise their rent. So they were really creative with a disincentive for people to want to report their changes. Particularly when it's in a time when there's not a lot of job security. So they're concerned that and we see it happen frequently, that they'll get to a point where they're doing really well in their job, there's a promotion coming up or an increase in pay that they're going to get, and they'll turn it down because they're afraid they're going to lose their housing voucher. And the program was also created back in the 30s so that once a family gets on the voucher program, they can stay on that program forever. The only time that they go off is if they do something wrong, they ask to be taken off the program, or their income increases to the point where they're able to pay their own rent for 6 months. So one of the things that we would have talked about many times and I would love to do is become what's called a move to work agency, which really those of us in the business call them lawless because they can make up their own rules. So I would love to have the flexibility as an organization to be able to say, for those that are work able, there's going to be a 5-year term limit for being on assistance. And then put the programs in place, which we already have, to help those families become more self-sufficient, whether it's helping them get an education, helping them find jobs, get job training, whatever it takes. And the other side of it is we already do that. We have a really successful program called the Section 8 Advantage Program, also known as Family Self-Sufficiency, which is a 5-year program targeted to getting families off of assistance. And what it does is as those families have an increase in income, what their rent still goes up, but the rent that we pay stays the same, and that difference goes into an escrow account. And if they're successful at the end of that 5-year period of time, they get the money that's in that escrow account. And we've had many families purchase homes and do really wonderful things with that. So we have programs in place to encourage that as well and kind of help them believe in themselves and move up and on. Thanks, Patty.